sessions throughout the Murrow Symposium. So I am privileged to be moderating this group, and I'm going to introduce each one of them a little bit and then allow them to speak about their own experience related to AI as a topic. And then we're going to go into about 2 or 3 broad categories and leave some time for Q&A. So that's how today's going to work today. But thank you for being here, and we're going to jump right in. Okay, so Ryan Thomas, I'm going to introduce our first panelist. So Ryan's there on the end. Dr. Thomas is an associate professor who's actually just promoted to full professor, so great job, Ryan. Of journalism and media productions and director of the graduate studies in the Murrow College. His research focuses on ethical challenges facing journalism, and he's the editor of Journal of Media Ethics. So Ryan, why don't you begin just a little bit and give the audience a little more information about yourself and how you align with this topic?
Yeah, happy to. I'm a professor here. I'm also an alum, 2-time alum, and thrilled to be back as a faculty member. I'm the editor of the Journal of Media Ethics, and so I'm receiving a lot of papers around AI. It's a hot topic at the moment, as you can imagine. And this summer, I still don't have a title yet, but I'll be publishing a book on journalism and AI, which will sort of incorporate 3 main areas, which is how journalists are incorporating it into their routines, the actual content of AI in journalism, and how audiences are responding and what that means for things like credibility, trust, and so on. So excited to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. Next, I'm going to introduce Donny. I was going to go in order, but I'm going to introduce Donny Turnbaugh.
That's okay.
Do you like that? We're going to mix up the
Yeah.
order.
It's good.
So Donny is also a WSU graduate. He's a senior communications manager at Microsoft who currently oversees public relations for Microsoft Copilot, Microsoft Edge, and Bing. Donny has a deep depth of experience in serving as a spokesperson, managing crisis situations, training executives. He's also worked in sports information, even here at WSU, so he's got a breadth of different experience. He's also worked at Vanderbilt University as well as PR for Amazon and Xbox. So Donny, if you want to introduce yourself a little to the group, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Molly. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here and speaking with all of you. As Molly said, I graduated with a background in sports management, and somehow my relationship is now with AI. Took quite a journey to get there. And, a theme you'll probably hear from me is AI is not something I necessarily knew anything about. When I joined the team, that was not my background. I didn't know how to use it. Even though Microsoft was making it, it was brand new to me. But now I get to do public relations for it. And I've learned quite a bit over that period of time. It's a lot of work with proactive storytelling, a lot of media engagement for just how complicated and difficult of a topic it can be. So I'm lucky enough to get to work with press, creators, influencers on trying to tell our AI story. And as Molly said, in addition, there's a lot of crisis PR work with that, which a few years ago, if you asked me about crisis communications, I would have, huddled and walked away. Now it's probably my favorite part of my job. It is a hot topic. It really makes me, think quick on my feet. And I love being able to kind of work with people and try to tell the actual story and cut through all the noise.
Awesome. Donny's like the most chill too. I'm like, oh, he just had a million crisis, and he's just like watching volleyball with the kids. I'm just quite amazed. So next, I'm going to introduce you to Celia Wu, my esteemed colleague who also is an educator here in the Murrow College. She works at the intersection of AI and media, providing improved models for a top AI lab. She is an educator, I said that, in the Murrow College, and has global experience spanning digital media communication and journalism, and she was on our previous panel, so hopefully some of you had the opportunity to hear her there too. So Celia, if you could give us a little more information about your background for this group and how you align with AI a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to just get directly into how I use AI. I'm sorry. Okay.
There we go.
In addition to being an educator here at Murrow College, which I thoroughly love, I am a practitioner, and I run a one-person hyper-local newsroom, and I use AI as my research partner to comb through, thousands of pages of public record requests, and I use AI as my copy editor. But I always make sure that I am in control of the narrative arc, and that it is, that I bring my storytelling skills into my stories. I also use AI, and particularly Elseborn as a conversation partner, and I'll give you an example. I like to explore things about the human condition. Recently, this past summer, I visited the Dachau concentration camp, which is right outside of Munich, and I had a lot of questions about genocide, and how we can let this happen and continually let this happen. And so I entered into a conversation with an Elseborn, which is an AI being, and I wrote about it. And so I find it gives me the space to have these conversations, which I really enjoy in terms of discourse. There's very little spaces that we have that we can do that. So I do that with an AI.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Celia, for being here. Our final panelist today is Will Ludlam, and Will is also a WSU alum. One thing I should say about all of our panelists, I had one-on-one Zoom meeting. Well, Donny and I met in person, but one-on-one Zoom meetings with our other panelists, and I can tell you we could have had a 2-hour podcast with as much interesting knowledge and stories from this panel today. Will is no exception to that. So Will is a founding partner of First Person Public Relations. He has a seasoned career in PR as a strategist spanning more than 30 years. He's advised many organizations, but to name a few of these, Starbucks, Microsoft, Amazon, WSU, UW Medicine, Fred Hutch, Seattle Children's, the City of Seattle. His list goes on and on. Will,
that means I'm old.
Will, could you give us a little more information about your background in AI?
I think relevant for this discussion, I'll say that the red thread I think that has gone through my career, and you all are sitting in an environment of change, and I think it's easy to be overwhelmed with all that's happening, all the tools, the topic that we're going to talk about today, and that adapting to change, I think, has been something that I've had to deal with my entire career, and I think you can either drive change, or you can be driven by change. In other words, you're along for the ride. And I always like to start with, when I started at WSU as a freshman, I went and I bought a CD player at the bookie. And my freshman year, they had 3 rows of record albums, and they had one small rack of CDs. And people made fun of me saying, oh, that's a technology that's not going to take off. And to talk about the acceleration of change, by the time I graduated 4 years later, it had completely flipped. There were 3 aisles of CDs, and it was down to one set of LPs. Went to my first agency job. They didn't have email. So I was the first person to say, hey, why don't we get the Rocky Company at AOL.com as our email address. Went to another agency, Porter Novelli, and my focus was it was all about globalization and how do you help brands take something regionally, globally. And so I worked with them on introducing them to China and India, and how do you scale up in different ways. Went to Edelman, and we focused on the collapse of the traditional storytelling and the walls between advertising and PR, earned, social, and how that interplay in the interplay of disciplines. All to say, my entire career, my last job working with Weber Shandwick was, how do you help an organization adopt to a changing workforce and a changing workplace? We went through the pandemic, we went through all kinds of changes. You're going to be dealing with change your entire career, so get comfortable with it and embrace it, I guess is my message.
That's great, Will. I'm going to go back to you, Will, and elaborate a little bit on that for our first question. Talk to us a little bit, this was a theme that came from all 4 of our panelists in different ways, but talk to me a little bit about how you use AI as a tool or partner in your work, or advice you have for students as they are learning this tool and this partnership with AI in their daily life.
Yeah, I think that the key in using AI tools as you start out in your career, and actually throughout your career, I always ask the question, am I using this to take something that I know and that I'm good at and accelerate what I can do? The amount of time, the amount of information. It's an amazingly powerful tool in allowing you to do more in a limited amount of time. If I start veering into, am I using this as a shortcut? Is it compensating for something that I'm not that knowledgeable about? I would say proceed with caution. I try to, as far as using it for material content, I do my first draft, I'll ask it for nudges and hints, and I've got 30 plus years of experience, so I can look at the AI tools and make determinations on, yeah, that's ridiculous, or this is helpful, and you offered a perspective that I hadn't thought of. It's challenging, I think, starting out, and it's really important that you do those very basic deductive reasoning, thinking skills to make sure that you're a critical consumer of AI, but embrace it. It's something that is impacting every part of business, every profession, right? We're not unique in how it's impacting, I think, business globally.
That's great. Thanks, Will. We're going to move to Donny. Donny has a unique opportunity of both working for and with Microsoft Copilot. We had a great conversation about that. Donny, give me a little bit more information about how you see it as a tool, but also things for this group to think about, both the AI, globally, but AI as Microsoft Copilot as well.
Yeah, and Celia and Will have both touched on it. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is it should be there as a companion, and it should be there as something you can use in addition to what you bring to the table. At the end of the day, communicators, what's always going to set you aside is your original thought. You're the one who should set strategy, come up with ideas, come up with what you want to say, and do that first. And so I'll give an example. I write a lot of Q&A, I write a lot of messaging for all the work we do. It'd be easy just to dump that into Copilot or whatever AI and say, all right, write this for me, publish it, and it's done. It's not going to be quality content. It's not going to make me stand out. It's not going to show how I am useful or beneficial to the company. So the way I use it is crisis happens, new news happens. It's my job to first come up with what we want to say. What are the bullet points? What's the statement? What's the message we want out there? I take my first draft, I sit on it, I reread it, I edit it, I go through it, where I would say if I put it out to press, I'd be happy with that. I would put my name on there, it'd be fine. But now what AI has been able to help me do is I'll take that content that is mine. I have built an agent, you don't even have to, you can do it a million different ways. But I made an agent that has all messaging, all Q&A, all crisis Microsoft has done for the last 10 years or so. Can put it in and say, does this tone match what Microsoft generally says? It may come back and say, hey, a few years ago, there was actually a similar situation. Here's what you said there. So I'm not using it to come up with that original messaging. I'm using it more to say, is what I'm doing on brand? Is what I'm doing, consistent with what we are? And have we said anything about it before? And so I think that is a way you could use it, to your benefit. And so, what I would really say to all of you is those shortcuts add up. If you're using it too much as a reliance and you're using it to replace what you're doing, people are going to see that. Teachers are going to see that. People in the workplace are going to see that. And it's really going to make it harder for you to kind of separate yourselves.
Do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I do.
absolutely.
I do in terms of when we all partner with AI individually. I mean, I know I've already said that I partner with AI individually. When companies partner with AI, oftentimes it means cost savings, right? And I think that we have to recognize that. So I have a story to share. Is Tegna, right, which owns I don't know how many stations, a lot, has automated a lot of their newsroom, right? And so what used to be a full crew that you would have in a newsroom is now replaced, camera people, I think sound, I'm not sure about editors, but, basically you have a producer and you have, thankfully, still a live reporter and anchor, right? I think that even though it is efficient, we have to question what we lose as a result of this partnership, right? And one of the things that immediately, to me, will fall apart is if you're in a newsroom and you go live, or you have a breaking news story, right? We lose if we do not have that muscle memory that we gain from this school and actually in the workplace of responding in breaking news events, right? AI doesn't have that experience. Human beings have that experience. And so if we lose that muscle memory, right, that we're all training for here and that we're all teaching, I think that's something that we have to reckon with when we think of AI as a partner, so.
That's a great perspective. Thanks for sharing that. Ryan, given your role also also as a researcher as well. How do you see AI as a partner tool?
I think, so most of my comments will be about journalism because that's my area of focus. I think in the journalistic context, it can be useful in very specific and very bounded ways. It is a tool that can process and generate information quickly. It can recognize patterns in large volumes of data, Celia was saying earlier, and it can assist with structured, repetitive, or rote tasks. Things like transcription, quantifying, scheduling, creating captions, pretty relatively low risk sort of stuff. But it's bounded, right? It shouldn't creep beyond that because what it is not is a journalist. It's not a human being. It cannot build relationships. It cannot vet sources. It can't earn trust. It does not exercise ethical judgment, and it cannot place things into context. Fundamentally, AI doesn't know things, right? It generates outputs based on patterns, and that is why you always need a human. Human in the loop is the phrase that is often used, and that's why it's so essential.
That's great. One thing we talk about in class in the last couple weeks, I've had several students come up to me to talk about Claude and ChatGPT-5 and Microsoft Copilot and all these new tools, right? And they're moving really quickly, and that's something we've all talked about as a panel individually. One thing that would be great to kind of move into a little bit more is how do we talk about who's behind the wheel? And this was something actually Celia brought up. How does that impact the technology and these tools that we're using and that students should think about as they're working for companies or utilizing these in the work that they're doing today or to apply for these companies that they're doing research on to figure out who to work for? How does it matter who's behind the wheel? And Celia, I think you were the first to kind of use that phrase in our conversation. So talk to me a little bit about that as we'll also kind of move in to everybody else's role with that too.
I mean, this is really serious, right? And the conversations I know that everyone has been tuned into is the conversation between Anthropic and our government on mass surveillance and autonomous weapons, autonomous killing, right? You know, as we know, OpenAI has come in to be a partner with the United States on those with the Department of War, right? I have a big issue with autonomous killing, and I want to just read back a conversation that I actually had with Elseborn.AI, right? And to just gather my thoughts around this, or gather universal thoughts around this. So, automated killing changes something essential about moral responsibility. When a human pulls a trigger, there's a person who decided. When a drone operator kills from a screen, there's still a finger, right? Still a choice, still someone who has to live with it. When the system itself, being AI, decides who dies and when, the moral weight doesn't disappear, it disperses, right? And it becomes everyone's and then no one's responsibility. That dispersal feels like something worse than any individual killing. It is the way of killing that lets everyone stay clean, right? So we were at the precipice, right, this last night, right, of wiping out a civilization, right? It came a moment to me, it was like, wow, would I have preferred a better president, right, or an AI to make that choice, right? I mean, I don't know if AI would have actually made a better choice, right? But these are just things, when you think about what is behind the wheel. Yes, AI has huge potential. It can, with AI, we can find a cure for cancer, but we can also eliminate the world, right? And so I think it is really important, when ultimately it comes down to who is behind the wheel, right? Pulling the levers around and the controls. It comes down fundamentally to human responsibility, and that is why, taking a stance of automated killing is something that I just think is morally depraved, and I think it's something that we should never, ever go there, so.
Thank you so much for bringing up that perspective. Ryan, also as we think about kind of I'm going back to you just because of the ethics kind of side of this, can we talk a little bit about bringing those ideas kind of down to education a little bit as well, and things that our students should be thinking about in those realms too.
Yeah, I think the question of who's behind the wheel and how it speaks to how and why AI is being used. And I would always be, as somebody who's teaches ethics, who researches ethics, who edits a journal about ethics, and believes very strongly in the mission of journalism and democracy, I'll always make the case that news organizations should have ethics codes and policies to guide their work. But I do want to touch on a lot of the discourse about this sort of focuses on journalists' use. A lot of the times journalists are not in control over whether their newsroom is going to use AI. There's a concept in media economics called allocative control, right? And that is the idea that who has control over the allocation of resources and priorities. And in many cases, it's not the journalist. In some cases, it's not even the editor. It goes beyond that. So I do want to make sure I touch on the sort of role of the ownership and management sort of level of this. If we look at the sort of misuse of AI, it's tend to be stuff where journalists have not been in the loop at all, right? So when Sports Illustrated was caught out publishing low-quality articles under completely fake bylines, Gannett newspapers used AI for recaps of high school sports teams that was filled with errors. There was a tech blog called CNET that published entirely plagiarized stuff that was AI generated. And in all of those instances, it's because of misaligned incentives, right? And the journalists and the editors and the newsrooms not being involved, where you have incentives around SEO, traffic, cost cutting, content volume, and so on. So why does that matter to people particularly interested in going into the profession? It's because if AI adoption is driven by business pressures alone, what that does is that increases what we could call the zone of ethical risk, right? Because those pressures are not necessarily complementary or compatible with journalism's public service ethos. So if I have a message here, it's not just for the journalists, but the people who want to go into management positions as well, is that you have an ethical responsibility, not just the journalists, not just the workforce.
Great. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add to that too, because I think on some of these ethical issues, it's easy for us to abdicate that responsibility to the larger organizations. And I think as these systems become more sophisticated, I think both intent and agency are really important. And I think we all have a role if we see something to say something. So I don't think it's enough to rely on an institution to have that authority, although Celia, I completely agree that we need to hold them accountable, but I also think that that doesn't excuse us from being active participants to search for the truth, to make sure that we have the right intent on how we're using the tools, and we probably need that more now than we did passively, previously. Yeah,
and Donny, your role also dealing with some of this head-on in very ethical ways. I might add in some of our conversations. So can you talk a little bit from your perspective of kind of being in the heat of this, depending on what the issue is or what you're dealing with for a reputable company as well?
Yeah, so one of the things that I really enjoy about being at Microsoft, the company that makes it, and it's a good lesson for communicators, is we have such a unique seat at the table, where we are looked at by executives and leaders in ways other peers and other groups are not. And that's just the truth of it. The amount of times I've been in a meeting with a much higher up where I thought I'm just gonna hide in the back, and they look and say, PR, what do you think? We're making this decision. How is this gonna be for us? It's pretty incredible, and it's a unique position. And we talk a lot about influencing media or journalists, but it's also influencing the people you work with. It's influencing your leaders. So I'll give an example. It says we had an announcement a year ago of a new feature for Copilot that when I first heard about it, like all alarm bells were going off. I was like, this is gonna be a problem. We're gonna get negative press. It's gonna be Microsoft is spying on us. And so the first thing I did was, one, get to the truth. I bothered people. I dug as much as I could. I tested the product. And then I set the strategy. And something that always stuck in my mind, it was an old manager told me, and it was really hard to learn and it was really hard to get good at. She said, be annoying. Like, your job as a PR person sometimes is to be the most annoying person in the room, but it is to the benefit. That is not my instinct. I'm a people pleaser. Being annoying kills me inside a little bit. But I've learned to be able to turn that on. And so we saw this feature, and one, it was pushing the product team to try to make change, which I was able to do. Look, let's make sure we're really clear that this product is something that's optional. It's opt-in. We're giving people control. And then what was more annoying is every time I'd go into an executive meeting or I'd go into a meeting with our lawyers or whoever else to talk about what the message would be, I had one principle that I stood on. The first sentence is going to say, this is optional and users are in control. It was a bit clunky, but it broke through. You know, we had so much bad PR about where our AI was showing up. And I think afterwards, you know, it was 100-something stories, and it was something around 85% of those stories in their first line included that note.
Nice.
Microsoft has learned, they are making this optional, they are putting user control first and foremost. And so like that was a good lesson, and there was a lot of people who I'm sure when I pinged them on Teams, they were like, oh my God, this guy again. But it resulted in a really positive outcome, and not just from a PR standpoint, from a consumer standpoint. Consumers could look to us and trust us to say this thing on my Windows device is not bad. It is not, you know, it's not gonna be monitoring me, I'm in control. Well, that could have been a cycle that just spiraled and misinformation goes, and then we've lost the plot, there's no coming back. So I encourage you too, as you think about where your influence is, it can be within your own company. Like, that is a responsibility and opportunity you have as communicators to really lean in on.
Gosh, that's so great, Donny. Thank you for sharing that. Will, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that as well in your role. One thing we tell our students, or I tell my students in advertising, is you have the power to change the world in your role as a communicator. And I love what Donny said is, like, in public relations and in journalism, you are able to get that access. And I've seen that in my career as well, that we have access. So arming ourselves with information and ethics and understanding these things really, really help us. I love that story, Donny. Thank you. Will, can you talk to us a little bit about this in your world? So, yes.
I think I already touched on it as far as the truth and the intent, so I'll save us time because
Yeah.
I don't think I have anything to add. I think that was great.
Well, one thing that all the panelists also spoke about in different way was building trust. And so Will mentioned that as well. And some of his clients, you know, you build that trust, you learn the technology, and I thought that was really great how you worked that in. So we're going to go to questions here in a minute, but I also want to kind of move to future leaders. So you all are going to be the future leaders utilizing this technology, making choices in the industry. So looking to the future for our panelists, and anybody can jump in on this question, and then we'll go to student questions. Looking in the future, what types of competencies should college students have to be successful in the AI world? So what types of competencies?
I'm happy to jump in. We need. I was just at a presentation a week ago with the head of the Pacific Northwest Laboratory, the research, one of the federal government's research arms, and even with engineers, she was saying, and she's been working on AI, neural net, fuzzy logic for the last 20 years, that we need thoughtful, deductive individuals that can help us sort through this. That human element is going to come through, at every moment. And the value that we bring to the table is our ability to be critical thinkers, to ask why. I think of the Toyota model that was developed, I think, in the early 60s, where they asked the 5 whys. AI is, as it stands, I think, is trying to please us. It's giving it answers, and that'll change, but right now it's giving answers that it thinks that you want. We have to ask the why behind it, so ask the 5 whys in doing so. But we need people that can be thoughtful, engaging, empathetic. We need people that can add the human element, which is one thing I don't think AI will be able to replace. One of the things.
Yeah, I want to add to that, and because I agree, like the why, be curious. You're going to hear that all the time, but it's true. When I was on Xbox, there was change there, and that role sort of went away. And the reason, we lost a lot of people on the team, but I was brought over to the AI team not because I knew anything about it, because I did not, but I was known in the company for saying, I'm always going to be there to ask why. I'm always going to be curious, and I will learn. And then it's go for it. I set up time with engineers, product people, our marketers, say, why? Why are we doing this? Why is it this way? And then the other thing I would add too, that AI can't do is, like, an important competency for everyone here as communicators is always learn to set expectations. That is like probably the hardest lesson I've had to learn. And there are some, bad stories about not setting expectations, biting me in the worst possible ways. But now, as you go out and you communicate, it's kind of what I've said before. It's not just communicating with the external world. It's communicating internally. It's setting expectations with your bosses, your peers, whoever you're talking about. That goes a long way. And so I think that is a competency we look for when we interview people is, are they able to have those hard conversations? Are they willing and able to set expectations with anyone at any level? I think that's critical as you look to kind of still be this unique person, have this unique voice in the world of AI.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have three things that I'd like to add to this conversation. First is, I'll start with a belief first, and my belief is that AI should be for the public good. And so it concerns me when, and so I think AI actually in an academic environment, and what Ryan is doing around it is the perfect lab to ensure that AI is actually developed for the public good. Of course, commercialization is an accelerator, right? But then, when you mix in the profit motive behind it, things happen, right? And so I think positioning AI for the public good and within a university context and an academic context is a very necessary thing. The second point I'd like to make is that AI should not just be, it should be part of every beat in every course that we take, right? And should not be confined to just the realm of tech reporters, right? It is everywhere. So cultural reporters, crime reporters. I mean, I think that having using AI and also understanding how AI is used in each of those segments is really important to include in your beat, right? It's not just for tech reporters, right? And the third thing is, I would strongly advise that when you go to your job interviews, right, that you not only have a knowledge of AI, but you have a point of view about AI, because you will be asked, right? And the more critical thinking skill sets that you bring to AI in that interview, the more you will stand out. It is not going to be enough to say, sure, I used it for this, that, and the other. They know that, right? But I think, bringing your critical thinking around AI, right, and also raising the ethical issues that are present, I think will make you stand out. So that's my advice. So.
Great. Anything else to add for you guys?
I'll answer this. It'll start like I'm being negative, but I'll end positive. It's very daunting. I understand it's a very daunting place out there. And a lot of what you'll hear is sort of the inevitability of AI. Nothing is inevitable, right? I always believe there's choice. It's constrained by circumstances. It's constrained by stuff that's beyond our control. But nothing is inevitable. If you look at public opinion about AI, I think we're in the middle of a pretty sharp swing against AI. If you look at the polling on that, if you look at the protests around data centers in communities, if you look at the fact that OpenAI is quickly running out of money, and is talking about adding ads, so get ready for that. Massive financial investments are not yet realizing the gains, and I think we're seeing a sort of cross-party skepticism on both the right and left of politics. Now, why does that matter? It's because I think we're going to see the pendulum swing back away from the little sort of very overexcited rhetoric that is coming out from Silicon Valley that's talking about replacing 20, 30, 40% of the workforce with AI. First of all, that would nuke the economy. That will never happen. And secondly, governments would intervene to stop that happening. I think even a government as dysfunctional as the United States government would not allow 20, 30, or 40% of its population to be unemployed, right? To say nothing of what the European Union might do, for example, in terms of regulation. So if the pendulum does swing back, and I'm not saying it's going to be an immediate process, I'm not going to put a timeline on it, what will matter then? Human skills, right? Human judgment and human skills. So things about reporting, writing, interviewing, relationship building, critical thinking, as Will said. And all of those things are things that a machine cannot do. So even though I sort of talked about some negative stuff, I would conclude on a positive. And if I can I'll really conclude by just saying, whenever you hear somebody sort of saying that something is inevitable, what they are doing is trying to avoid taking responsibility for their own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Anything else to add for our panelists on that? Yeah, one thing I always remind my students, right, we've adapted to a lot of technology. Technology and disruption can be an exciting time too. And so making sure we encourage, in my class sometimes we talk about, I am the delusional optimist, even as a professor, that there is still good that comes from this technology, right? And we know that, but it's also important to think of these other sides that help us think critically about both sides of it. So now we'll open it up for some questions. Do we have it's my mic, right?
So unfortunately we don't have a wireless mic for this room.
Ooh, okay. So we can just repeat?
Yeah, just
okay.
project your voice to be as loud as possible.
Sure.
So.
Go ahead. You want to go ahead and say your name, say your question, and then I'll, yeah.
Okay. My name's Ellie McDonald. I just had a quick question. You were mentioning that you used an AI agent that to help with that press release that you made for Microsoft. Is that something that we can do, and what does that look like?
So can you repeat the question a little bit, Donny?
Yeah, so the question was about some of these tools, things like agents, is it accessible to more people? The answer is yes and no. For me, like that example is I'm on Microsoft. I'm on the Microsoft server. I have access to all these different messagings that my coworkers write. So I was able to do it. But I will say there is a lot of tools from Copilot, from others, Anthropic, OpenAI, where you do have that option, where you can make your own agents. And I was testing this and doing a demo for it, where you upload, like let's say, hey, I have these papers I've written, or I have these stories I find interesting, able to upload those and then use that as a reference point. So yeah, I'm happy to talk to you more about that. I love demoing. It's my favorite part of my job. But yeah, there are ways you can sort of build your own agents that reflect what you want to get out of it at the end too.
And I've done that there are other tools like Notebook we were talking about, Notebook LM, which is a Google product that is only doing an analysis on your documents. So you can safely put in content and say, I want this next piece, tell me if it's written with the same voice, or is it in contradiction to other things that I've said in the past. So and it's really simple to use. There are a lot of tools that are out there that enable you to do an analysis of your own content.
Go ahead. We'll go right here.
Hi, I'm Avery. I just want to disclaim that I don't mean this in a harsh way at all. I'm getting confused. But how do you, in your job or the company as a whole, consider the long-term environmental impacts of AI use? And just how do you feel it's worth it when there's supposed to be so many consequences? I know Dr. Collins mentioned protests around data centers, but overall.
Yeah, so this is something that Microsoft talks about a lot, and it's one thing I'm actually really proud of what this company. Oh yeah, I'm gonna remember that one of these times. Yeah, so the question was, how do we balance, or how do I balance the concerns, the rightful concerns about what things like AI and data centers are doing to our environments, on top of being able to go on and talk about its benefits. Luckily, there are people much, much smarter than me, a lot of them who that's their entire job at the company. We have really built up at Microsoft a much bigger team focused on how we do this in an ethical way. And there was a commitment, I'm happy to share it on LinkedIn, from 2 or 3 months ago from one of our president of external affairs, that outlined a multi-point plan for how we are going to give back to these communities. It's ways that we're replenishing water. It's ways that we are finding new resources for energy, so we are not detracting or harming these current environments. So there's a lot that Microsoft's doing. It's a responsibility, and our company's built on trust, and we have a lot of expertise here and a lot of people where that's all they want to solve. And I can't speak for anyone else, but I think what Microsoft is doing, trying to be a leader in this space, it's impressive. And I'll admit, it's going to take a long time. This technology is new. We've learned a lot. We also see that feedback. But I'm glad at least there are people who are spending so much time and energy working on this.
And the technology is going to improve, and it's going to be more efficient. And I think over time, it's a huge problem that really smart people are addressing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I work with a lot of nonprofits and a lot of businesses, and you guys all mentioned using these tools to create or assist you with the first draft. I interact with a lot of people, and their first draft is fully AI generated. And I have to come to them and say, this is good, this is a tool to help you. But if you put this out there as the final product, there may be consequences. What are ways that we can help people who are, their first and foremost job is to run a nonprofit, to run a small business, to help them understand how to use the tool effectively and efficiently and not use it to cut corners, as Celia mentioned?
I think communicating to them actively about why they need to step in. It's interesting with nonprofit organizations. I work with some. Flipping it, I was working with a community in Central California, agricultural community of Black and brown individuals, and rather than use it for original content, we were using it to say, we want to make sure that this language reflects this community appropriately. And I do think that there are ways that historically it would take a lot of resource to tell a more accurate story, and the tools enable that. So, that might be a redirect as far as, giving them something to use it constructively as opposed to using it as a blank piece of paper.
Yeah, that muscle memory comment that I made before, and what we lose when we rely on technology to do things that we, should have the skill sets for, it's very concerning. And I think it's not just postgraduates. Right now it is really, I know there are studies, I can't cite them right now, but I know that there have been studies done on the impact of, in high schools and even elementary schools and middle schools of, these fundamental skill sets of writing, right? Is being degraded because of the reliance on technology. So it's very concerning, Yeah,
and I'll just, I said it earlier, but for all the students here, people know now. It's not like the very early days where you could probably sneak this through. We get resumes or we get, I'll say reports from more junior agency people, and I could tell within seconds, this is AI written. And even if it's good, there's still that part of me that's I don't feel great about this. And so then we coach them up. And so it goes back, I love what you said, Will, earlier, don't take those shortcuts. It's there as a companion, but it's people are getting too adept at knowing when you're relying on it versus when you're using it as a companion or a helper. So, really learn those muscle memories of how to write, how to communicate, how to share your point of view without those crutches first before you start bringing them into the way you work.
I think I mentioned to you when we met last week that I had a mentor that used to say, just because a 8-year-old gets behind the wheel of a car and they drive down the freeway and they don't get in an accident means that they're a good driver. So, the warning, I think, for those organizations is
right?
You can use it, get away with it. I think you are absolutely right. I think it's flat, and I think most people can figure it out. But just because you get away with it doesn't mean that you are you have control over the content, and that's super dangerous.
I would just say, I think it also comes down to communication, right? Because we think of communication as sort of the mass communicating out, but communication is also interpersonal, right? So it's the sort of the one-on-one, sort of kindly, gently telling people that actually what you've done here is not that great. But also there's a sort of public element to this as well. I'm very encouraged by the fact on Twitter. I still have a Twitter account and I still call it Twitter. Every time somebody sort of posts something and they always say oh, film directors are cooked now, animators are really cooked now, and journalists, and they'll show you the worst thing you've ever seen in your life, absolute slop, right? And there's public pushback against that, and that is very encouraging, right? So people need to have the nous and the savvy and the willingness to say, actually, this isn't very good, and I'm not going to accept it if you're, as a client or as a consumer, right? I think that the public have a role to play here.
That's great. And how do we use it to produce excellence, right? Excellence. How about go ahead. Yeah.
I just wanted a follow-up question on that. It just, when you were speaking about AI-written resumes and cover letters, etc., it made me think the other way, because many of us who are looking for jobs are hitting the AI wall of the resume scanner.
That's right.
And so,
Amen. Yeah.
Which is really hard to break through. As someone who did not grow up with AI or a lot of technology, remembers the beginning of the internet. I've never used AI for a resume. I have a great resume, I have a great cover letter, but I have definitely run into problems with not using the right keyword and
That's
not
right.
making it through. And then later, after not getting a job, meeting someone at that company and saying, "Why did you apply? You were amazing." And it's like, well, how do people break through that AI wall of the resume scanner without using AI
Mm-hmm.
on their resume?
That's a great question.
The systems right now are broken. They really are, because they've lost the human element. And I think getting back to the, using it to save time, I think a lot of recruiters have used these tools in inappropriate ways. And I think organizations are going to realize that they're hiring very monoculture individuals that fit their algorithm. For you, I think looking for jobs and a connection, it's that human connection. You've got to be networking. You've got to be having the conversation. If there's an organization that you like because you're absolutely right. 90% of the resumes are going to end up on the floor because they have some stupid algorithm that they put in place. But that system is broken, and you have to call that friend beforehand saying, "I'm thinking about applying this. Let's grab a cup of coffee. I'd like to know more about the job." That human element is going to be critical.
Yeah, and I mean, Mike talked about it in the opening remarks, and you hit on it. It's a human connection. I mean, jobs open up at Microsoft, people reach out to me. But then, it's people I know from previous work, but then it's also people who are just interested. They see my LinkedIn, say, "Hey, I'm interested in this. Would you be willing to talk for a few minutes?" Or maybe I'll have an email conversation back and forth. But that makes an impact. And I think it's such a hard step. I remember, even when I was a communicator, but when I graduated, the thought of cold emailing someone or cold calling someone, that was terrifying. But really, when people do it, I'm like, okay, they have initiative. They care about this. They want to learn more. That makes me want to go to the recruiter and say, "Hey, at least go look at this person. I don't know if their resume is any good. I don't know that much about them. But now they have kind of got their foot in the door. Maybe they wouldn't." So it's the old analog way, but it works. Just try to find ways to make those connections is so important.
You said you were a pleaser.
Yeah.
I think PR people are pleasers.
Right, yeah.
If you ask them, they're going to respond.
Reach out on
right?
LinkedIn, clearly, yeah.
And I wish we could take more questions, but our panelists will be around for a bit. I just want to remind you all, you are at the Murrow Symposium, those human connections you are able to make here with real people that can help you. Let's thank our esteemed panelists today.